Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Kubernetes Cluster API provider for vSphere bi-weekly meeting. And I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for attending. I'm going to go ahead and share my browser, including the meeting notes. And I recommend, if you want to go ahead and bring them up as well, let me make sure that they are in the chat link, the chat here. Why can I not see my chat? I see the thing up top, but I don't see chat. Weird. Oh, chat. It's there. Okay. Yeah, if you want to add yourself to attendees, that would be great. And all right. So we have a couple of action items for last week. I asked if people could take a look at this manifests command. It's a few weeks old now, and maybe that should indicate the interest. But if people do have an opportunity to take a look at that, I would really appreciate it. So yeah, I don't think anyone's commented on it. I think, Andrew, you may have made one or two comments, so thank you. So you're definitely not no one. And the second thing is, we asked last week. Go ahead.
May I ask a question for that one, for the manifest command? I briefly look at it, and could you kind of clarify and what is the major motivation there? I feel like it's almost the customized, but it's customized with our basically CAP-free needs or cluster API needs. Is it?
That's not really accurate. I think it eliminates the need for a customized binary, and it eliminates all the shell scripts and dependencies for generating the manifests for cluster API. For vSphere or for Kappa, it doesn't matter. Basically, you build the manifests command and you point to your API types. So you end up with a Go binary that can generate the manifest data without any external dependencies, because it does invoke customize as a library. And without the need, like I said, without any external dependencies, and you're guaranteed that the types that it generates will be the types that were embedded into it. And those could be the Kappa types or the CapV types. It only cares about these things as runtime extensions. So as I think I mentioned this 2 weeks ago, Andrew and I had a conversation about this where we said there are two different discussions here. There is simplifying the manifest generation for CapStar providers. Then there's also the discussion about whether we should be generating manifests at all, because there doesn't seem to be a pattern followed by most Kubernetes projects. It seems to be unique to Cappy. And so we agreed that those are two different discussions. But as long as we are generating the manifests, then if we can simplify it even further and remove the possibility of error. Just today, I think you've noted that it may be the case that the manifest container image isn't being updated when the manager image is built. So again, if we can simplify the generation of these manifests further, as long as we have to generate them, there's an opportunity to make that a little more deterministic, and we should probably take it.
And is this command going to replace what the manifest container does today?
It doesn't have to. The manifest container is really a delivery mechanism. I mean, all that would end up inside that container would be this binary. It would be a distroless Google image, like a static image. You could just download the binary though. You wouldn't need the container. Again, today it's still just a delivery mechanism. It's just that it's delivering dozens of files. In this way, it would just deliver a single file, or you would just download it like you would cluster cuddle.
I see. Thank you. And one more follow-up. So how I should say I need to go back and look at the PR and understand more. But how this command is going to evolve if there's a new version of customize? Also, I guess my question is how this is going to keep updated once things change.
Well, I mean, it's the same way that we would have updated the manifest image if we needed to support customized version 3. And by the way, our current templates don't support customized version 3. But if we needed to support customized version 3, then we would have to update the image with customized version 3 versus we just would update the manifest dependency to customized version 3. There actually is a, I think I linked it to somebody else. It's an internal VMware Slack. I'll link it here. I have a branch where they actually do have, yeah, right here. I actually wrote the manifest command for customized version 3, but I discovered that our current templates or current customized data isn't version 3 compatible. And so this branch is just out here. And the only difference in that branch is a couple of lines in the library and then the vendor directory. So it's not too difficult to update, but it's also not any more than would be required if it was updated as part of the manifest image.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. So 2 weeks ago, we asked people if they would take a look at the new troubleshooting guide. I think it would be, if you haven't taken a look there, we really appreciate you jumping on that and seeing if there are any missing issues listed that you think should be added, and please go open a PR to add those. So we were joking around before we started recording about going on vacation. So I was actually on PTO last week, or the week before last. I don't remember, honestly. I think it was the week before last. And while I was gone, a community member, and then Andrew and Travis, and we discovered and verified a critical bug in the 040 release. And they pushed out 041 on August 2nd. And I was just super happy to see that you know, the process is set up and the community is working together well enough that we're just able to get a release out when we need to right away. And so I think everyone deserves a big round of applause there. So thank you. Okay, so I'm going to punt this migration to CAPI v1 Alpha 2 to the bottom because I know we have a couple of issues that people want to discuss today. So is he on? Did Sujit join the call? I'm looking. No. Okay, so he's not on the call, but there is an issue. I was hoping that Sujit would add it to the agenda. I think he said he was going to show up to the meeting. I reminded him, but I'll touch base with him after this to make sure he attends the next one. He has a PR for implementing Affinity, anti-Affinity, and he opened a Google Doc to discuss that. And I wanted to visit that on this call. So I'll make a note here. Follow. Okay. There was one more issue. Since you're on the call this week, I actually want to touch base with you on this before we go further. I forgot about that. So 2 weeks ago, I wanted to follow up on 306, which was your PR, Hui, for injecting the machine images with alternate package repositories. And we had a conversation about that, a Zoom call about that, and I think I updated you. I think you walked away from that. It was my impression that you walked away from that, having all the information that you needed to move ahead. And I just wanted to understand if there's anything I can do to help unblock you, or what the status might be on that.
It's my side, and it's my goal of this week to update the PR to get it what we discussed, and so that I can ask a review after update the PR. Okay. So I have. Go ahead. Yeah. So just one question. So we have that common image builder repo now. So should we? Okay. So I was bringing that up just now. So I created a couple of issues
ahead of this call, let me go ahead and add this. So this is remove local image builder from CapV. There's this one, Hui, and then there is, I've got them written down. There's the CAPI image builder. It is, yeah, so I didn't create those issues yet. But yes, you're right. That's where we should do it. We should migrate the issue.
Okay, good. So I'm going to just open the issue there in the image builder repo.
Yes. And then once that issue is addressed, I mean, it's a separate issue, I suppose, but it's related to remove the local image builder from CapV. I don't want to do that until you recreate the issue over there, though.
Sure. Thank you.
Those the same notes? Do I just have them up? Yeah, okay. All right, so moving ahead. So follow up with Sajit. Okay, so Yuvraj, you wanted to join the call this week to talk about something. If I recall, was it something in particular? Or did we address that earlier this week? I forget, honestly.
If it is regarding the hostname issue, we already addressed that. And
Okay.
yeah, the PR is already merged and it's working.
Okay, great. So just FYI, let me make sure everyone knows what PR that is. It got merged earlier this week. It was a PR to explicitly, do I have the rights? Yeah. Am I looking at close? I am not. So there was a PR to write the Etsy host name and Etsy hosts file and write Etsy host name and Etsy hosts file merged. Because what happens is those files are regenerated by systemd hostnamd, but not until after the first reboot, after Cloud Init runs. So because I forget the exact order. We had Yuvraj and I had a call about this a few weeks back, but because of the particular order and where those get set, kubeadm, when it resolves the node name, actually gets the host name only, not the host name, not the host FQDN. And so we need to update the Etsy host name and Etsy host file, and as part of writing the files out with Cloud Init. And so Yuvraj merged that issue earlier this week or last week. So thank you, Yuvraj. And you verified that that fixed the issue?
Yeah, it fixed the issue. And also, just to add to that, for the first boot, for it to work, we also run the hostname command to actually set the hostname properly. For the reboots, the Etsy hostname and the Etsy host files work, but for the first boot itself, for it to work, we actually need to set the hostname, and we did that as part of this PR as well.
That's right. It's coming back to me. It goes a little deep, but it has to do with the way the order occurs in the Cloud Init data source, and at which time DHCP provides the FQDN, and then how that gets reapplied. So we make sure it gets reapplied appropriately. Thank you, Yuvraj. Alrighty, so we have a new issue I want to discuss before we go any further. Let me find it. It was, why can't I find it? It was over here. It is your PR, Yassine. Do you happen to have it, Andy? Can you paste it in the document?
Sure, let me just have it right here.
So it's going to be VMC, okay, support. Especially since Moshe made the, joined us. I know it's not convenient for him there. Okay, you posted it in the chat, it looks like. Let me grab that. Thank you, Yassine. Okay, so as many of you are aware, or maybe you're not, all of the pull requests that are processed, or all the pull requests against the CapV repository are tested by bringing up a real cluster on a remote vSphere endpoint. This vSphere endpoint happens to be what's known as VMware Cloud on AWS. What is VMware Cloud on AWS? It is the vSphere installed on bare metal servers in cages owned by Amazon. Because of that, though vSphere has access to some, or rather, it's more accurate to say some Amazon services can access any virtual machines you bring up in that vSphere environment. One such service happens to be Amazon's Elastic Load Balancer. So Yassine created a pull request to add support for the AWS Elastic Load Balancer service if you are running vSphere on VMC and AWS. And Moshe mentioned in a comment that he would like to hold this issue in favor of a more general load balancer framework that isn't specific to VMC and AWS. And he makes some valid points that there are more common load balancers, and this really does need to cater to a general solution. And I don't disagree with any of those, Moshe. I think I actually am the one that asked Yassine to work on this, and my reasoning was thus. To be very clear, VMC and AWS is vanilla vSphere. There's nothing special about it. It's just that the AWS services can access it. Now, you could argue that it's not on-prem, but it's actually kind of marketed as hosted on-prem because, again, it's just vanilla vSphere with a fancy UI. Moshe, I think one of your concerns was, well, people that would use this are just going to use AWS anyway. Well, they're not really the same thing. If you want vSphere, one of the use cases of VMC is to extend your data center if you're at capacity, so you can have burst capacity in a hosted on-prem solution. So people actually use VMC to extend their existing data centers. But I think what it really boils down to for us is we do all our testing on VMC and AWS. It is vSphere, it is vanilla vSphere, but one of the constraints with which we're hampered is that the VMs come up on a private network. And to do that testing, we use what's effectively a jump host. We SSH in, we invoke the commands there to run the tests, and they access the VMs. The vSphere endpoint may be public, but the VMs are not. And there's no great way to make them public dynamically, except through the VMC AWS Elastic Load Balancer service. Because we use this for testing, this would make our test workflow a lot more rapid and a lot simpler. We wouldn't need this jump host solution anymore. So I almost feel like this is similar to the conversation about manifests. I think, Moshe, you make some very valid points, but I almost think it's just a different discussion. Like this PR is almost more for the CapV project itself than for CapV. It's for helping develop and test CapV, because one of the other aspects is it gives us the ability to test an HA configuration for CapV, something we lack today since vanilla vSphere doesn't have a load balancer solution. So Moshe, I guess I'll say this and end it and then open the floor here. I am absolutely not opposed to a pluggable framework for different load balancer solutions. But I would argue that VMC or the AWS ELB PR, when running on VMC, is low-hanging fruit, serves an immediate need for the CapV project, and it is a feature that will be tested by virtue of every PR. So there is there's a platform on which to test this that is funded and backed by an SLA. So it's not like it's a one-off. But it's totally not opposed to having this refactored into some type of, like you said, pluggable solution, because as we all know, vSphere, unlike the other cloud providers, just doesn't have a built-in load balancer solution. So that's sort of the state of this PR, I think. I'll open the floor up.
Maybe we can have a middle solution here. The AP, on the types, currently this PR has a reference to VMware Cloud, and this type holds only the data that is necessary to configure the load balancer. Maybe we can rename that into something more generic that is not tied to VMC?
So, Moshe, I know I want to show you this. I think you've seen it. I like what you said there, Yassine. So a couple of you are familiar with Skate, a project I worked on, simple Kubernetes test environment. So what you just said is similar. I can't ever even find anything in here. It's been a while since I worked on this. What you just said is very similar to what I did here. It is I just call it NAT instead of load balancer, but same thing in this case. It's a runtime role extension, although I moved away from that because I realized that you're not getting validation with the API server with role extensions. But it could accept an AWS load balancer config or a Linux virtual switch config. So essentially what you're describing is seen as a similar solution, although I think what it would end up looking like is closer to the solution that we currently do for the kubeadm. Where is it? Here we go. It's on the machine currently, but the kubeadm configuration for a machine can either be join or a init.
Yeah.
We could have a load balancer configuration, and these could point to these that you could have VMC, VMC, then that points to AWS, or you could have F5. But they could, all of those could implement even maybe an interface. And that's what that Skate does. It implements an interface. This thing implements an interface that they all must adhere to. So anyway, I'd like to hear from Moshe because Moshe, you're the one that feels strongly.
So I fully understand and appreciate the need for VMC from a testing perspective, and the fact that this is more to enable additional testing and make testing easier. But I think we can do better in terms of providing a common interface that if it doesn't provide the functionality for other load balancers today, it at least doesn't make data changes tomorrow. So if we can at least get the API buttoned down in this PR, and then adding additional PRs doesn't become a data or an interface change, that I think that would make it a lot more palatable, if that makes sense.
It does. Let me see here.
So one of the things that maybe we can consider is something similar to the kubeadm bootstrap provider. So
you mean
so we have like a load balancer provider spec.
I know what you're describing. Yeah, go ahead and describe it for people not familiar.
So we have a load balancer spec, and then if that load balancer spec is specified, CAPV will wait until another load balancer provider will then go and pre-populate, let's say the load balancer IP or whatever the case is, and it kind of manages that load balancer out of tree almost. So that we can then implement an F5 can come and provide their load balancer, and you can create a custom one. And even if the VMC load balancer is bundled with CAPV, but at least it operates at a certain distance from CAPV and isn't kind of natively tied to it. So we have some level of abstraction.
I mean, I like the sound of that. I would just say it adds a lot of additional work, some work that we're not even sure how it's going to function yet. They're still undecided in V1 Alpha 2 how they're going to pivot additional resources. So, there's discussions around that. This would be a new controller. I think that my normal response to that, Moshe, would be that's a discussion that needs to occur at the CAPI level, except we're sort of uniquely situated.
Without an ELB, yes.
Yeah, and everybody else has the solution, so they're not going to be incentivized to actually want to have this discussion.
How do the
honestly,
other cloud providers like Amazon do this?
Amazon built Amazon's cloud provider. Amazon just has the Elastic Load Balancer service. Google has their load balancer service. I mean, honestly, Moshe, I think what you're describing is it should happen at the CAPI level, and CAPV may be the primary use case. I don't want to block the functionality that we can obtain with the VMC load balancers based on how long this could take. Because we can always revert things out as well. And it's not just load balancers, Moshe, it's also the HA, the ability to test HA. And this is the primary test bed for CAPV. And right now we lack the ability to do any HA testing.
I think that to address your point, Moshe, we can rename definitely the one of the types that refers to VMware Cloud to make it more generic. So this way we can implement, like if we want to implement other providers for load balancing, this wouldn't make any other changes or any breaking to the API.
Yeah, I think if we can do that, that would be great. So if we can do that, and maybe then mark the first provider implementation as a to-do with a reference to issues that we create for more long-term discussion.
Well, I want to open the table for discussion again at the CAPI level, and if they say it's our problem, because what you described is unfortunately for you, I can visualize the utility and benefit of it to the degree that I want to make sure CAPI is aware of it. You did too good of a job selling me on it. I really do like it.
So I just don't want it to get lost in the middle. So if we can maybe do a little bit of work to make this a little bit more abstract and then reference a longer term discussion, I think I'll be happy to unhold.
Sure. And to be quite honest, if we can solve a couple of the other bugs to prevent HA testing, I'm going to re-raise this issue, because to me, the ability to do HA testing is worth merging support for VMC LBs and then reverting later if we need to, because we are just completely blocked on HA. And if it was just LBs, I'd totally be there right with you, Moshe. It's the HA testing that's blocking us hard right now, because a lot of that V1 Alpha 2 work that they're doing is around HA. So yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, let me make an action item here to follow up with Yassine and Moshe. Moshe, I think I spelled your name wrong.
Nope.
Okay. Yassine and Moshe, RE, LB provider like Cubadium Boots. I'll know what this means. Provider. Yeah, I do like that idea. Oh yeah, it's just I immediately go to who's going to use it but us.
Well, even in AWS, the load balancers there can get pretty expensive.
No, absolutely. I mean, Andrew, I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on what Moshe is describing, because it would have utility. I mean, even outside of CAPI, just having a load balancer spec that you would attach to instances or nodes essentially, and then you'd have a controller out there that connects things up to the IPs.
Yeah, I don't have strong opinions on this right now, but I think given that the varying environments that vSphere is deployed in, I think it makes sense to at least have some sort of design discussion around how abstract and how extensible we want to make this. Because there is also the trap of trying to accommodate too many use cases and going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, and that's why I made sure to make known the HA issue, because we can't block ourselves on that just for this, and we can always revert later if we need to. So
I think Steven has his hand up.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
I've just gone through the experience of getting one load balancer to work because I needed it for a talk with a workshop component I did at Open Source Summit Japan. And one of the issues with vSphere is there is no standardized load balancer, and nobody would want to be a kingmaker that picks one. Like F5 is one that might be popular. NSX provides this facility if somebody chose to deploy NSX. The one I used was Metal LB, but I think you're going down a path where you need to do it as generic plugins, because the on-prem environment is that there is no one load balancer. I don't even believe that there's one that's dominantly popular. So, you know, you might be able to narrow it down to 4 or 5, but you'd really need an architecture that supports load balancers with some kind of a plug-in mechanism, almost like a CSI.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. That's good points. So moving on from that, I want to, so you can't see this on my screen here. Let me see, I had another issue listed. Control plan, okay, Kat, I don't have an issue for this, so I'm gonna make a note to myself to file one. But this is going to affect us in the V1. Okay, actually, you know what? We'll open up the V1 Alpha 2 because that's where it'll be. All right, so I haven't updated the PC. Okay, yes, okay. 1 second. Support for not knowing the control plane endpoint ahead of time. Okay, so this was the issue I had open. Okay, so over the weekend, I filed a PR. Why is this not opening? There. That outlines creating or updating a V1 Alpha 1 provider to V1 Alpha 2. And this was based on a conversation that I had with Andy Goldstein before he went on PTO. And I wanted to get all this written down while it was fresh in my mind, because this is going to be the strategy that CapV uses to move to V1 Alpha 2. And people have asked what work they can do, or if there's anything that they can do to help get CapV ready for V1 Alpha 2. So if you want, we don't have probably time to discuss everything here, but I highly recommend you go take a look at the tracking issue for migrating to V1 Alpha 2, which will take you to this document that kind of gives you a high-level overview of the new API groups, the new V1 Alpha 2 resources, and the fact that the actuators are now infrastructure controllers. Not really, but they basically the same thing. And this will go over all the work that we're going to have to end up doing. I filed some issues today. I need to add it to this this tracking issue. One of them is this. This is going to be a big one. I want to make sure we have it here. Okay. This is using the run command instead of the kubeadm module in the CloudInit user data. So for those unfamiliar, today CapV uses a forked version of CloudInit that Jason Jason from Kappa, I always say D Tiberius, I think that's incorrect. Jason from Kappa forked a year ago for a standard CloudInit version and for CentOS and Ubuntu. And it has this kubeadm module that he and one other engineer introduced. In V1 Alpha 2, they are moving away from their fork back to the upstream version of CloudInit. And so that means that they're no longer going to use that kubeadm module. To get ahead of that, we have the opportunity to go ahead and accommodate that change and go ahead and test that change, because one of the secrets of, very public secrets about Kappa V1 Alpha 2 is that it's not testable yet. The kubeadm bootstrapper is not yet functional. So even if we moved CapV's master branch to v1 alpha 2 today, we couldn't actually test it. I've actually got a note to speak with Travis about disabling E to E on master and only on the release branches, and creating a release branch simply because we need to be able to do work without PRs blocking. But since there are changes we can make that are be non-breaking but prep the current version of CapV for v1 alpha 2, such as updating to use run command instead of the kubeadm module, I went ahead and created an issue for that. So again, please take a look at this tracking issue, which will link to the guide I wrote, and see if there's any type of work that interests you. I will go through the guide and try to parcel out some issues. It's actually sort of an atomic set of work. I think if it could support up to 3 people, but they'd have to work pretty closely with one another on it to not step on each other's toes. So if you're interested, shoot me a note on KK Slack, and we can see how we can parcel those issues out. So any other questions about v1 alpha 2?
Yeah, regarding that run command instead of kubeadm module, I don't know if it's related, but there's an issue on the kubeadm bootstrap controller right now to add up support for additional commands so that the user can pass in his own additional commands that will run as part of the...
Yeah, it's unrelated. That issue is, so the run command is actually a list of commands in Cloud Init, right? And so it's an unrelated issue. They just want basically a pre-exec and post-exec command for the kubeadm bootstrapper. The difference is that today in Kappa and CapV, or Kappa and CapV v1 alpha 1, there's this kubeadm module that if you point it to a kubeadm config file, it knows how to do kubeadm init or kubeadm join. Instead, in v1 alpha 2's kubeadm bootstrapper, the Cloud Init user data won't include the kubeadm module. It will just use kubeadm init or join as part of the run command. So the issue that you're referring to is important, but it's unrelated to this.
Okay.
All right. Are there any other questions about the v1 alpha 2 migration? Okay, we don't have a hard timeline on that yet. I know Andy would like it sooner than later to kind of get a bunch of the higher profile CAPI providers in sync. But the fact that we can't test this yet, and the fact that we don't have any stakeholder communities, or sorry, community stakeholders pressing for this outside of the CAPI community itself, I don't feel that it's super high profile. It is where I'm going to be focusing my time, though, to be a good CAPI community citizen, and that and 1 or 2 other issues. So if you are interested, I'm a good point person on it, but I think there are enough other issues for people on which they can work that we don't need to resource this too heavily yet, because again, we couldn't produce a working CapV provider based on v1 alpha 2 yet anyway. We only got
one other question regarding v1 alpha 2. Does this mean that we're holding off any implementation that introduces changes into, for example, the kubeadm bootstrapping?
I would take a hard look at what you're introducing. For example, I know that some people want the ability to create users. Now, creating users is not part of the current kubeadm bootstrapper implementation. There is an issue for it.
Mm-hmm.
But if we implemented that support for that in CapV, and they don't have it in the kubeadm bootstrapper, we are introducing an immediate regression, future regression. So if it's on their roadmap, then yeah, I think we can add it, or at least check with them first to make sure it's priority for them. And don't assume because it's not an issue for them that it's not a priority. If it's something we need, then that could be enough to be a priority for the kubeadm bootstrapper. So just don't assume because it's not already listed as a priority that it can't be one.
Okay.
But yeah, I do think that we should be careful there. So, but yeah, that's primarily the only thing over which we lose control when it comes to v1 alpha 2. we actually get a bunch of control back since we now own the controllers. No pun intended. The last thing I'll note here, then I want to move on to the E2E discussion with the rest of our time and save the backlog grooming, because I think the testing discussion is important. I have yet to open an issue for this. I kid you not, I've got a list of about 17 issues I need to open. This is, I think, number 6 at this point. But I'm going to try to start attending a lot of the V1 Alpha 2 design discussions, even though I think it's probably too late for some of those. I know they're still working some stuff out. But I need to check with Fabrizio and Chuck. Moshe, it's related to how you point out that I actually find it ironic or somewhat funny that you have a concern about VMC not being on-prem, because if you knew what I said 90% of the time to Andrew and Travis and Yassine and Yuvraj when I'm complaining about things, it's about how no one considers on-prem. And I consider VMC on-prem because some of what I've seen with the KubeADM bootstrap provider is it assumes a load balancer. It assumes an existing control plane endpoint. And so I need to go through, or if somebody else can and wants to volunteer to do this, that would be great. Their workflow, and again, I'm going to create an issue to note the work, and ensure that it supports not knowing the control plane endpoint in advance. Because it's not clear to me that it does, because of the way they've created a separation of concern between the bootstrapping and infrastructure. Because remember, in CapV, you don't know the control plane endpoint until the first machine is booted and has an IP address, not unless there's an external load balancer. And that is just completely separate from any of the other providers.
So I think for Kappa, it's fairly the same. You don't know the endpoint until that load balancer is created.
But that's ahead of any infrastructure, Moshe. My point is that you don't know the control plane endpoint until the first CapV machine is online, or sorry, it has an IP address. So at that point, you've already bootstrapped your Kubernetes cluster, and all the other machines are waiting to get that IP so they can build their KubeADM join configs.
True.
Yeah, and it is a huge design difference between the two, and it is so subtle. Like, you know CapV as well as anyone, and partly because I'm bad at explaining it, and partly because it's so subtle. Even it took you even twice to hear it to get it. And again, it's way more on me, but also because it's subtle, and it's I want to make sure that we're not lost in the mix there, because we could totally get soft locked out of this design with completely unintentionally.
Are you scheduled to go to the V1 Alpha 3 summit?
We could talk offline. We only have 15 minutes, and I want to make sure we do the framework. All right, Andrew, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me share my screen real quick. All right, you guys can see that. So last week I started kind of exploring ideas around how we can improve E2E test coverage. Because right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, like what we do for E2E is we do the whole bootstrapping process where we kind of spin up a kind bootstrap cluster, and then we pivot it into a management cluster, and that's kind of where the tests end. So I would like to build a E2E testing framework where the only thing that you need to give the framework is an existing management cluster that you brought up with cluster.gtl, and the kube config file pointing to that management cluster. And from there, we can extract all the vSphere parameters and whatnot, so that we can then provision additional target clusters against that management cluster. And then that allows us to test other functionalities of CapV that we don't do in the initial bootstrap. So like one example could be creating machine sets and scaling those. Another one could be if I wanted to test like a custom kubeadm configuration, then I can create a new target cluster with that and then verify against the cluster that it worked. Other things are like,
my only question is why isn't it done already? Sounds awesome.
the other thing, which is kind of related to that bug we found last time, was like testing the cloud provider, right? Like testing that the storage integrations, all that work. So one issue I ran into though is like I really want to use the Kubernetes testing framework for this one, but the way we vendor Kubernetes and kind of the Go module situation there isn't great. So I wasn't actually able to get that working. So I ended up just kind of building my own lightweight framework to kind of get the initial pieces working. And so I wanted to kind of show, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Is that specific to the CapV module setup, or is that something that's general for Kubernetes right now? Is there a solution we can explore, or is it just...
It's general because the testing framework right now, as it is, it's not really designed for being like being vendored from external sources. Like, so the upstream Kubernetes project is working on that, but as of now, like trying to vendor that requires vendoring in the entire like Kubernetes repo, which conflicts with a bunch of stuff we have vendored right now because we're vendoring.
After this call, let's chat. I actually have a solution for that, but yeah, I'd love to see what you put together.
Yeah, and like most of the stuff is just I kind of copied a few stuff here and there from the framework already, anyways. But what I really wanted to show was the actual like testing table and what it would look like. So what I envision is like we have create test. This one is create target cluster only control plane. So what this test is doing is we give it, we extract like the provider spec from the existing management cluster, and then we create like a new cluster resource and a new machine resource to provision a target cluster with one machine. And then the part I haven't done yet though is like actually validating it. But this is the bare bones like framework that I have in place, where I can just add a new entry in the test table, and that gives me a new target cluster on a generated namespace with a new machine.
That's awesome. So I noticed something here that, actually you do it the right way, never mind. I noticed that a bunch of the tests I've seen lately in KK, they actually don't use the subtest notation. They just run the test cases as is, but you actually are doing it. So kudos to you. That bothers me when they this looks good. My one concern is you mentioned like specifying different kubeadm configs. In our existing test deploy strategy, we have this nice little catch-all in case things fail. We use govc to clean them up. I almost wonder if we don't want to stick with that strategy and use pre-generated names, so that we can always use govc to issue a vm.destroy just to ensure that those resources are cleaned up. Because what if the machine doesn't come up, so therefore the cluster delete fails? I just want to make sure we're not leaving orphaned resources.
Yeah, that's a great thing, and that was one of the concerns I wanted to raise, was that because we can't assume anything about like resource pools and whatnot, the only thing we could do in that situation is like extract the resource pool from the bootstrap or the management cluster, and then add another namespace in that resource pool. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I mean, what you could do is actually just have like a JSON file that maps to some test schema, and it essentially is like the E2E test wrapper around this, where you actually have a JSON file that's an array of test runs, and it says, here's my folders, here's my pool, here's my credentials, use this to create these, and then use these to generate my specs, and then run the test suite using these, using these specs. It's almost like you have two layers of tests. You've got, this is your test, this is your test framework, but then you've got a lightweight wrapper to generate the test environments, which includes the manifest files. It includes ensuring that the resource pool or folder is present, and that, whatever data file that represents those test runs could also map to, like I said, JSON. So you might have a another wrapper around this. It still could be the same binary. But does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think one of the initial approaches I thought about was like, yeah, like similar to what you said, like having like test fixtures files, where you just go through each of the file, you apply it against your cluster, and then like, yeah, it's instead of having like test tables or anything like that. But the thing is, like, I worry about, like, I'm trying to write tests where you can run it on any environment or any vSphere deployment, and how realistic is it that we can have test fixtures that would work across any vSphere deployment?
Well, I mean, the moment you're going to talk about any vSphere deployment, then what you need is a root resource pool and root folder, and then you need to take ownership of the PRs or issues to support dynamic resource pool and folder creation in CapV. I actually am the one who ejected that ahead of the 0.3.0 release. For those who are unaware of that, CapV used to have the ability to create resource pools and folders on the fly. I removed it because the problem with that was that we never deleted them. CapV never deleted them because it didn't know if it could. It didn't know if it was the one that created it or if it was okay to delete it. And what if you had two message loops trying to delete it at once? So I brought this up with Andrew back then, was we need a way to manage those resources. And it just hasn't been high priority. But it would seem to me, if you want a test framework that can run anywhere with minimum configuration, then you need to set like a root location, and then it needs to be able to create those resources from that location. Alternatively, you could link in govc in here as a library, and I can show you how, govmami. You could still have that root location, and then using like GoMega's, before and after patterns, you can use govc to dynamically create the resource pool and folder ahead of each test run, and then delete them after that test.
So there's actually also a non-test cleanup use case. So in a production environment, there would still be occasional or intermittent resources that might not be cleaned up for the same reason they might not be cleaned up in a test. So I do think that there's a general need for like almost a janitor. A janitor that knows how to detect if a resource is actually owned by anything, and if it's not owned by anything, delete it on some life cycle. And I know that AWS uses that as well.
I'm laughing because I'm 40% responsible for that janitor. It was Liz Frost wrote it, and then she went on extended leave, and I took over that project. So I'm very familiar with it. It runs as a service and a periodic job in a file cluster. I don't know if it would be the management cluster and the CapV environment that would run it, but you raise an interesting point, and the issue becomes, do we keep a journal of all resources created by CapV on vSphere, or do we have some way to identify resources created by CapV on vSphere? And unfortunately, the answer is we'd actually need to keep a journal, because the vSphere, if you want to get down to it, like, there's no atomic way to guarantee that we could stamp every resource we touch at creation. There's always chance for orphaning something. We'd have to record what we create.
So I guess, like, so the question for the group, I guess, is like, how strongly do we feel about like the EDB test portability? Like, would it be so bad if we just added flags or environment variables where you're required to put those in if you want to run tests, and just leave it at that? Or do we want to have that?
How would you envision it otherwise? You have to have a root location.
Well, the method right now is you assume that there's a management cluster and you pull the resource pool out of the existing cluster that's there.
Oh,
and that allows you to. I don't think I explained that part that well. But
no, you did. I'm just an idiot. And I don't listen. No, that makes sense. I have no problem with that, but I think that before I would approve this, I'd want to see the govmami to at least generate dynamic namespaces off of the existing root location.
Okay, that seems reasonable to me.
I think Hui wanted to say something.
I feel like the currying those namespace or the resource pool from the management cluster is reasonable to me. If I want to run the C2E, I just need to make sure like additional tests can be deployed and using that resource pool or folder or whatever.
Well, that's on you. That's on the operator, honestly. If you bring something up and then, I don't know, like if somebody gave me a desktop and then I wanted to run a file server on it, a file share system on it, that's my fault for doing that without seeing if I was allowed to do it. I think the first question most people are going to have, Andrew, is why, it's the same question I had. I didn't realize that you needed to have the existing management cluster. You said you did, but it was so not what I wanted you to say. My brain didn't process it. And so there may be an option here that this also could call, or just to clearly document, this is what you need to do with cluster cuddle. But I think every time you introduce this to somebody, they're going to say the same thing. Can this actually stand everything up, greenfield? And I like where you have it. Let's force them to actually use CapV to stand up the cluster and then use this to run the tests.
Yeah, and I was kind of being lazy in that sense because I knew our CI stuff had all the cluster CTL stuff, so I didn't want to redo any of that work. But yeah, so I'm going to be working on this for the next few days. So if folks have strong opinions on what they want to see in the framework, then please let me know. After this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open an issue with probably like a checklist of all the different test scenarios that we should probably test for, and then we can try to split up that work across folks here.
Andrew, do you think you should open that test and testing commons? I don't know if you know anyone involved in that project or in cluster API, because it seems like these tests, even though they're going to be some of them specific to vSphere in general, again, if you know anyone involved in testing commons.
Yeah, I'm pretty involved there.
I know, that was the joke.
Andrew is the one actually leading the test commons.
So I don't think testing commons is nearly at a point where we can talk about that yet, because we have so much technical debt we're kind of undoing.
Gotcha.
I think I don't think we should worry about running the Kubernetes test suite against clusters. I think we should worry about, for now, we should worry about like the cluster API tests, cluster API specific tests. So like spinning up target clusters, spinning up machine sets, those things.
Upgrading V1 Alpha 1 to V1. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Like the implementation of some of these will be specific to vSphere, but the tests themselves, it's like the actual test design, or not design, but test types. I feel like we should discuss that at CAPI.
Yeah.
Not that it should block us, but you should drive that discussion there. I'm sure they're already having it, or if they're not, they should be, and you should own it since you've already done a lot of this work. We're out of time. I think, Andrew, I look forward to seeing you file that issue. This looks really great. Does anyone have any final questions for Andrew on this? All right, great. I want to thank everyone for attending, and I will be following up with people on those issues. And I also really wanted to commend everybody for being so civil in our discussion. And I know we're all passionate about these different issues, and I really appreciate that we can come together as a community and have a good discussion about them and move forward. So thank you, everyone, and until next time, I'll see you on Slack. Later.
Thank you, everyone.